Welcome into the program. Great to be with you as always. And it is almost Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is upon us, but we're still here. Wednesday before Thanksgiving, we are still going to be bringing you all the news that is fit to print. And you guys know this is my favorite holiday. If you've been a fan of mine for any length of time, if you've ever heard me do a Thanksgiving show, you know I talk about it all the time. I love this holiday. This is my favorite holiday. It's the only religious holiday that I celebrate. And I know that people think that's a little strange as well. It's nothing against anybody that celebrates other religious holidays, but this is, if you remember, the original intent of this holiday was George Washington, when he declared it, it was supposed to be a national day of prayer and thanksgiving. That's the full name of Thanksgiving. So, unfortunately, like we've done in so many other aspects of our life, we have taken God out of it, we've taken prayer out of it, we've taken religion out of it, and now we just think of it, for the most part, as just a day to eat a lot of food and watch football. And goodness knows, anyone that knows me, I have no problem with eating a lot of food and watching football. In fact, you can tell I'm dressed up today specifically because my Auburn Tigers will be playing the evil empire, the University of Alabama, this weekend in the Iron Bowl, which is the biggest football event every single year in the state for sure, and I would argue in the country. So it is the biggest holiday in the state of Alabama, and by that I'm referring to the Iron Bowl, not to Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday. But I really love this holiday. I really love this time of year because it is intended, and when celebrated correctly, it is supposed to be done as a day for us to all sit back and be with our family and pray and give thanks together for the blessings that God has given. That's what this holiday is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a day of prayer. And ironically, we always associate Thanksgiving with eating a lot of food, and goodness knows that's a tradition that I'm very fond of. But if you're looking back at some of the original Thanksgiving feasts, they weren't feasts at all, they were fasts. If you're looking back at some of the pilgrims at Plymouth, they had the Thanksgiving meal and the Thanksgiving feast to be thankful for a big harvest. That is also true. But there were some years where they actually fasted to give thanksgiving. And so that really puts it into light that Thanksgiving is supposed to be about prayer. It's supposed to be about our spirituality and us taking us a little bit of our time out of our year to collectively say, thank you, Lord, for your blessings and the way that you have been good to us throughout the year. That's really the spirit of Thanksgiving. That's really the original intent. Originally, it was the only intent. And so because of that, I think it would do all of us a great deal of good to remember that and to keep that in mind as we're going through this holiday. And for those of you who have been paying attention for a while, have listened to my podcast, you know that I always do a special and look at one of our former presidents that made a Thanksgiving proclamation. Well, we've done Washington, we've done Lincoln. This year, it's Reagan. So very excited that we are going to be looking at Thanksgiving 1985 and look at President Ronald Reagan's Thanksgiving Day proclamation. So I have two things from Ronald Reagan. I have his proclamation, which I'm going to read here in just a second. And there's also a clip of Ronald Reagan that we're going to watch, just a Thanksgiving Day message out to the people watching on the TV that day. So this one's not an official Thanksgiving proclamation. Proclamations have a long and storied history. Like we just talked about, George Washington gave the original one. We went over Abraham Lincoln's Thanksgiving proclamation when he instated it as a yearly thing back when he was president. And then Reagan also issued Thanksgiving Day proclamations. Every president does. I don't know if they issue one absolutely every year. I believe that there's some years that have been skipped. But generally speaking, this is a annual day where the president comes out and declares a day of thanksgiving and prayer. And some of them are really well done, very well written, and it's a very personal thing. It gives you I think when you ask someone what they are thankful for, it gives you a powerful lens to see who they really are. It gives you a good idea of their personality, and more importantly, their values and their principles. It gives you an idea of what they believe is important, and that can really help you determine the kind of person that you're talking about. And so as we do this and go throughout this particular process, I think it shows a lot about who Ronald Reagan is. So we're going to go ahead and play not the official proclamation, but a clip of Ronald Reagan from him, Thanksgiving 1995. And by the way, I want to give a hat tip to the Heritage Foundation for providing this clip, putting it together for us.
Good morning, everyone. You know, the Statue of Liberty and this wonderful holiday called Thanksgiving go together naturally because although as Americans we have many things for which to be thankful, none is more important than our liberty. Liberty, that quality of government, that brightness of mind and spirit for which the Pilgrim Fathers braved the seas and Americans through 2 centuries have laid down their lives. Today, while religion is suppressed in perhaps 1/3 of the world, we Americans are free to worship the Almighty as we choose. While entire nations must endure the yoke of tyranny, we are free to speak our minds, to enjoy an unfettered and vigorous press, and to make government abide by the limits we deem just. While millions live behind walls, we remain free to travel throughout the land, to share this precious day with those we love most deeply, the members of our families. My fellow Americans, let us keep this Thanksgiving Day sacred. Let us thank God for the bounty and goodness of our nation. And as a measure of our gratitude, let us rededicate ourselves to the preservation of this, the land of the free, and the home of the brave. From the Reagan family to your family, happy Thanksgiving, and God bless you all.
All right, so President Reagan there with a very touching proclamation, or sorry, that's actually not the proclamation, just a message for those of us on Thanksgiving. And I think that it really does show where Reagan's priorities were and the kind of person that he was to get an idea of exactly what he was grateful for. And he shares the same sentiment that I do, that the thing that I'm most grateful for, at least on the national level, is for God's protection, his providence, and that we live in a country where we're allowed to worship him and to seek him in any way that we deem fit. That there is no government, there is no magistrate, there is no king, there is no head of a church, that the church is the official state church or anything like that that tells us this is how you must worship God. We live in a country where we decide that. That is something that I am incredibly grateful for. And I have to tell you this. When you're talking about liberty, specifically religious liberty, that does deserve gratitude. And Reagan, in a very short little clip there, kind of wrapped it all up into one message. Because he started with the Pilgrims and then ended up on religious liberty. That's what the Pilgrims came here for. There's all kinds of historians that don't like that message, and so they'll kind of try to sterilize and secularize the story. But let us remember that when the Pilgrims came over here and when most of the people immigrated to America, they were doing so to escape religious persecution. The Church of England, the Catholic Church, there were powerful churches that were in bed with the government and used the force of government to persecute those that believed differently than they did. And it was the Americans that said, let's go to a place where we can worship God the way we want to. Religious liberty is the very first right granted under the First Amendment. You have 5 rights in the First Amendment. That's the first one. And you look at the way that it's described in the Declaration of Independence. Religious liberty was first and foremost the most important right that the founders believed that we had. And that's why the Pilgrims came over here in the first place. They wanted to be able to worship the way they wanted to without facing the persecution that they were facing in England. Was there a promise of economic prosperity? Maybe there was a slim chance of it, but they had to know that it was going to be rough to start out with. Because that's what we'll always hear. We'll always hear it was about money. It was about them being able to make a profit. Look, you look at the way that they lived and the way that they knew that they were going to have to live for a while. They knew that they were going to be living not so high on the hog for a while. They came here because they believed that religious liberty was worth making the journey. It was worth the risk. It was worth the risk to them. And it should be worth the risk to us. And so Ronald Reagan really showing us a bit of his heart there. And I'll say, since I just recently, I came back from the Ukraine not too long ago. They don't really have religious liberty there, at least not the way that we do. We talk about religious liberty as though virtually every modern first world country has it. Not the same way Americans do. I'm telling you, I've been there. I've seen it. And in some of these churches over in the Ukraine, and I talk to people that have lived there their whole lives, they do suffer religious persecution. The Orthodox Church there controls absolutely everything. They even control the translations of the Bible that are allowed to be made in Ukrainian. And one of our translators, brilliant young woman, who she speaks 4 different languages, and she reads the Ukrainian Bible, and she said that there are certain things that they intentionally misinterpret. They intentionally skew to make it more in line with the Orthodox Church's belief and their understanding of the Scripture. And there are all these beautiful, gorgeous cathedrals. You've probably seen my pictures online. But they raised a lot of the money to rebuild those brand new cathedrals, mostly on the backs of taxes that they forced from other people. And that's not the way a church should operate. Churches ought to be going out of their way to give money to those people, not take it away. And you've also got a personal story, and I hope that I'm not getting anyone in trouble by saying this. One of the ministers that we worked with over there, the guy that was the minister over the congregation in the main city that we were visiting, he's literally been beaten in the streets because he believes differently than the main church there. And Ukraine's not a third world country. This is a first world modern European country. And yet they suffer religious persecution over there in a way that very, very few people that live in America will ever know or ever have to suffer. And so, yes, I'm very grateful for that. I wish more nations had that. And Ronald Reagan really punctuating that and thanking God for that we have that ability, we have that liberty here in this country. We're the country that invented the idea of religious liberty. We invented the idea of, hey, why doesn't the country just stay out of church matters and let the church handle itself? That was us. And I'm very grateful to live in a country like that. And one thing that I wanted to point out, too, that you'll notice in that clip, Reagan was thankful for the media. Now, I know that we're looking back at it now, and the media has been horribly savage on Trump, and I understand that there's a great deal of bias there. But there was a great deal of bias against Reagan, too. I've looked back, and you look at, keep in mind, this was my major, this is what I studied. I studied history of journalism, the history of media. I wrote papers on, some specifically, on the Reagan era and how the media handled him. And looking back at some of the coverage, it was spiteful and vicious. A lot of it was reminiscent of what we're seeing go on right now with President Donald Trump. And yet, there's Reagan knowing that the vast majority of the media, and keep in mind, this is before Fox News, this was before the media was, he had any conservative outlets to go to. The media, I'm sure, was viewed by him and a lot of conservatives as the enemy, as people that were not honest brokers of the truth. And they had a stranglehold on the industry far more so then even than they do now. And there's Ronald Reagan knowing that most of the people in the media don't like him saying, I appreciate the fact that we have freedom of the press. I'm thankful for our media. It reminds me very much of something that I experienced back when we went to the Restoring Honor rally. You remember that Glenn Beck and some of the 912 Project and some other organizations that he's worked with helped put that together. The opening prayer was a guy, and these are Tea Party people. This is at the height of Obama and his Congress and Obamacare and all that stuff that was going on. And in the opening prayer of that particular event, I remember the guy thanking God for our president and our Congress. That wasn't an easy thing to do. It was not an easy thing to do, especially in that crowd. And you know what? I didn't hear a single person in that crowd boo. In fact, if you're looking at the tape, you see everybody behind him shaking their head going, amen. Because that's the way we should be. We realize that it's not perfect, and sometimes people hold office that we don't like. But you have to be able to say to God, look, our system's better than any other. And let's be grateful for that. Let's acknowledge that. And let's be thankful that we have leaders that we elect. Sure, we screw it up sometimes and elect bad people. It happens. Happens a lot, unfortunately. But the fact that we're still able to choose them, that we have a say in that, That is something to be thankful for. So I'm going to go ahead and read some of Ronald Reagan's proclamation, and I wanted to mention before I did one last thing about that clip. He also thanked God for America's goodness. And I know that sometimes that's hard to see, that's hard to think about, but America is a very good country. We're by leaps and bounds the most charitable country in the world. We give more money to charity than any other nation. There have been so many countries that modeled their freedom, that modeled their constitution after ours. The world has become better, more prosperous, and more free because Americans have good hearts and they care about their fellow man. Goodness knows there have been times where America didn't do that. There have been times where America has royally screwed up. But overall, you look at the net, and the good far outweighs the bad. And I'm also thankful for America's goodness. Now, let's go ahead and look at this. In 1985, this proclamation was made on November the 15th. And this is Ronald Reagan, of course, writing. Although the time and date of this first American Thanksgiving observance may be uncertain, there is no question that this treasured custom derives from our Judeo-Christian heritage. Quote, "Unto thee, O God, do we give thanks," unquote, did the psalmist sing, praising God only for the wondrous works of his creation, but loving guidance and deliverance from dangers. A band of settlers arriving in Maine in 1607 held a service of thanks for their safe journey, and 12 years later, settlers in Virginia set aside a day of Thanksgiving for their survival. In 1621, Governor William Bradford created the most famous of all such observances at the Plymouth colony, with a bounteous harvest prompted him to proclaim a special day, quote, "to render thanksgiving to the Almighty God for his blessings." The Spaniards in California and the Dutch in New Amsterdam also held services to give public thanks to God. So getting a little bit of a history lesson here from Ronald Reagan on Thanksgiving, which I think is appropriate. In 1777, during our War of Independence, the Continental Congress set aside a day for thanksgiving and praise for our victory at the Battle of Saratoga. It was the first time all the colonies took part in such an event on the same day. The following year, upon news that France was coming to our aid, George Washington at Valley Forge prescribed a special day of Thanksgiving. Later, as our first president, he responded to a congressional petition by declaring Thursday, November 26, 1789, the first Thanksgiving Day of the United States of America. Although there were many state and national Thanksgiving days proclaimed in the ensuing years, it was a tireless crusade of one woman, Sarah Josephina Hale, that finally led to the establishment of this beautiful feast as an annual national-wide observance. Her editorials so touched the heart of Abraham Lincoln that in 1863, even in the midst of the Civil War, he joined his countrymen to be mindful of their many blessings, cautioning them not to forget, quote, the source from which they come. That's the one that we read last year. And that they are the gracious gifts of the Most High God, who ought to be thanked, quote, with one heart, one voice, and by the whole of the American people. And so this is just Ronald Reagan kind of rehashing the history of Thanksgiving and telling you how we got there. And you'll remember that we read some of those Thanksgiving proclamations. A lot of them read more like sermons than they do something you would expect from a president, something you would expect from a government official. And I think that's very encouraging to see, because you just would not see that anywhere else. You wouldn't see this kind of acknowledgement of God and his providence. You wouldn't see that in other places. And I'm very grateful that we had presidents back in the day that were very quick to do that. And so we'll continue on. It is in that spirit that I now invite all Americans to take part again in this beautiful tradition with its roots deep in our history and deeper still in our hearts. We manifest our gratitude to God for the many blessings he has showered upon our land and upon its people. In this season of Thanksgiving, we are grateful for our abundant harvest and the productivity of our industry, for the discoveries of our laboratories, for the researchers of our scientists and scholars, for the achievements of our artists, musicians, writers, clergy, teachers, physicians, businessmen, engineers, public servants, farmers, mechanics, artisans, and workers of every sort, whose honest toil of mind and body in a free land that rewards them and their families enriches our entire nation. Now, this is essentially thanking God for the free market, which is a great thing to be thankful for, because in this country, We have a system that rewards you for your work. That if you are able to work hard, if you have a specific talent that brings value to people, then you are rewarded monetarily with that. You are rewarded for your talent, you're rewarded for your abilities, and you're rewarded for your work effort as well. And that is something that Reagan is pointing out is unique to our land, or at least in a more robust way than it exists anywhere else, and that is something to be grateful for. This is one thing that I think, and I'll try not to get too political here, but this is one thing that I think Reagan and several other presidents, to a certain degree, including Trump, has done a really good job at. Because I don't like the idea that the president is an elitist that thinks that all the big important things happen in labs, or all the big important things happen in researchers at universities and people that are enriched in sociology in the academic world. I'd much rather have a president that at least acknowledges, there's a lot of really hardworking Americans out there, and the reason that I'm able to do what I can do, and the reason that everybody else is able to function well, is because we have a society, we have a system that rewards people that work hard. And that is a really good thing. That is something to be grateful for, because part of the reason we're able to secure these blessings is specifically because there are other people working on different things all around, and we're all able to sort of work together to make this society the way that it's supposed to be. Now, that's something that affects me personally, because believe me, if it were not for your civil servants, your firefighters, your paramedics, your police officers, so on and so forth, and if it were not for the people working on the roads, putting together buildings, people that work on sound engineers, electronic, I wouldn't be able to do what I do. I would starve to death just talking to myself if it were not for all the hardworking men and women that go out there and spend their money on advertisers that help fund this show. My money, or my job, would not exist if it were not for those people. And I think Reagan realized that as well, that we're able to have all these nice things. We're able to have entertainment and luxuries and a lot of other things that the rest of the world doesn't have, specifically because of the blue-collar working people that put all that in place. And that is something to be grateful for as well. So we're going to finish up here. He's in his last couple paragraphs. Let us thank God for our families, friends, and neighbors, and for the joy of this very festival we celebrate in his name. Let every house of worship in the land, and every home and every heart be filled with the spirit of gratitude and praise and love on this Thanksgiving Day. Now, therefore, I, Ronald Reagan, President of the United States of America, in the spirit and tradition of the Pilgrims, the Continental Congress, and past presidents, do hereby proclaim Thursday, November 28, 1985, as a day of national thanksgiving. I call upon every citizen of this great nation to gather together in homes and places of worship and offer prayers of praise and gratitude for the many blessings Almighty God has bestowed upon our beloved country. So Ronald Reagan, very much in the mold of George Washington, saying, look, every citizen has a responsibility to be grateful to God for what he has given us, to be grateful for his blessings, his benefits, his protection, the way that he has always looked out for our well-being, our needs, our wants. We have a responsibility to do that. And I appreciate that Ronald Reagan said it so eloquently, sort of following the mold. I think that probably what happened is he read George Washington's Thanksgiving Day Proclamation and took sort of that same spirit and sort of transplanted it. That's actually why I chose 1985 as the year that I was going to focus on this year, because there's so much of it reminiscent. He calls back to that original Thanksgiving spirit. And that's what I really want all of us to do. I want all of us to call back to that original spirit that existed when we had just won a war. We realized that we had so much to be grateful for. Look, when we gather around our family, let's do the best that we can not to get bogged down in what separates us or what tears us apart, because we can all come together and say, you know what, there's things that we all need to be grateful for. And that's a much better way to lead that off. So I encourage you to do that this week. And maybe it would be a really good idea for all of you to sit down and engage in a little prayer, maybe a little bit of Bible study. Because if we're going to be grateful to God, one of the best ways that we can show our gratitude is to continue to study and live by the precepts and the laws that he gave us. I almost just said stay the course, friends, because that felt like a chaplain's report. But we actually do have a chaplain's report coming up at the end of the show. I don't even really know how to start into this story because there's so few details on it. I want to be very cautious in telling you only what we know. Apparently at a Walmart in Talladega, which is not too far from here, there was a police officer that was shot because there was a domestic dispute in this Walmart. And in this particular domestic dispute, apparently there were 2 killed and there were 2 police officers injured. Now, we don't know a lot of details. We don't know if the guy who actually did the shooting was one of the ones killed or he killed somebody else. We're not sure. There was a medical evacuation that took place. In other words, this guy's being flown right now to UAB, gunshot wound, the police officer. He is expected to survive, but we certainly do hope, especially considering how close it is to the holidays, that he'll be okay. And please remember to pray for him and his family. Hopefully he'll be able to pull through. It looks like he is going to survive. So that is one other thing to be thankful for. So the Southern Poverty, it looks like we have a call. I tell you what, before we get into our next story, we'll go ahead and take this call. Good morning. What's on your mind?
Oh, not a lot. What's going on with you?
Oh, just getting ready for Thanksgiving, reading President Reagan's Thanksgiving proclamation.
Outstanding words, too, because, now that was a statement.
Absolutely.
The things that made sense and he related to people, and even though he was certainly a star, he was a Hollywood star first and then became that politically, but he had the ability to engage people and they understood where he was. And as far as leaders today, I don't see that at all.
Well, and one of the things that I talked about that I was very appreciative of, because this was a very brief proclamation. I think it may even be shorter than Abraham Lincoln's proclamation. But one thing that I appreciated that President Reagan wound up incorporating into it over and over is he kept talking about how really the point of Thanksgiving, it's not the food, it's not the, getting a day off of work. It's not even really about being with your family. What it is primarily about is praying and being thankful for the blessings that we've given. And I think, I could be wrong, but I think based on this and the history that he includes in it, he probably read George Washington's Thanksgiving Day Proclamation and sort of modeled it after that.
Might have. I don't know, but it's good to see our leaders take part in something like that, and inspire people to recognize what's truly important about it. And I enjoy that part of it. Of course, you know what a fan I am of him anyway. And even taking one of those Facebook tests, I found that he was the president I was most like, based on my personality and everything. That was pretty cool, too. So you got to be like him. It's certainly one good one to be like, for sure.
Yeah, it really is. And I can kind of see that in your personality. You're very much a people person. And so I probably wouldn't be very much like Reagan, honestly, because.
Yeah, but something about him that always bothers me.
What's that?
Through his entire time, the media, and especially the left, made him out to be just no better than average intelligence anyway. That he was just sort of a buffoon. He was sort of, he just wasn't very bright. And I don't get that at all. I mean, I really don't. Because, intelligence can be measured in a lot of ways. But I think he was far more intelligent than they gave him credit for. He was a man that knew how to do things and used his intellect to be able to do that. And I never did understand the mindset, but most people recognize it's great.
Well, and that's one thing that I really appreciated about not the proclamation, but the message that he gave that we played just a few minutes ago. And I made mention of this. The media was always after the guy. And I mean, like you said, they insulted his intelligence. They insulted his family. They talked about, said he was lazy.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. They said he was lazy. One of the laziest presidents of everything. Tip O'Neill said that about him.
Right. They just said that all the time. And then we heard in 1985, when he had been going through that for a while with the media, he actually specifically said, I thank God for our media and the fact that we have freedom of the press. And that to me shows a great deal of character coming from his part, that even though the media usually disagreed with him, he still recognized that freedom of the press is a really good thing that America has.
Yeah. What a man of integrity. going through difficulties, and people forget a lot of times the man came within an eyelash of dying.
Yep.
And then he said, "I'm sorry, Nancy, I forgot the duck."
That was he always did have a great sense of humor. Well, thank you so much for your call, John from Millbrook. I appreciate it. And you have a happy Thanksgiving as well. So I wanted to change gears here for just a second and talk about by the way, 860-1440, if you do want to call in, if you do want to voice your opinion, talk about Thanksgiving, maybe talk about what you and your family are going to do. I would encourage every single one of you to just take a few minutes, maybe read one of Washington's proclamations or Lincoln's proclamations or the 1985 proclamation that we're reading here. And there's several others that you could choose from, several that are really good. And I think that what that does is it sombers up the moment, and especially with younger people with kids that the only thing they may associate Thanksgiving with are the sort of traditions that we have with the eating or the football or whatever else. That really centers you. And it declares to you, hey, this is what Thanksgiving is really about. Let's not forget the actual intended purpose. And so that is something that I encourage each and every one of you to do with your family. So let's go ahead and go to some of the news of the day, because just because the holidays are upon us does not mean there is not news. So the Southern Poverty Law Center is at the center of the border debate now. And it's really important because, like I said, the Southern Poverty Law Center, that's just down the road. And our top story yesterday was actually about them too. So the Southern Poverty Law Center causing all kinds of havoc and mayhem, despite the fact that the holidays are coming up, and goodness knows I have my differences with them. I've invited them to come on my show. I don't know how many times. And every single time, I just don't get a response. I've invited them. I've got in touch specifically with their media department. They just won't take me up on my offer. So I guess they don't want to come on and actually address some of these things. But nonetheless, so the Southern Poverty Law Center is really at the heart of the border debate right now. And their latest thing is that they actually wound up winning their case. There was a district judge in San Francisco. Again, I don't know why the Southern Poverty Law Center is involving themselves in something going on in San Francisco, but nonetheless, this was their idea. So there was a ruling by a district court in San Francisco by Judge John Teager. I actually, I thought about maybe getting a different judge, but you can't get another Teager because the wonderful thing about Teagers is he's the only one. So it's spelled with one G, but it's spelled the same as Tigger. Anyway, so John Teager of the U.S. District Court there has made this ruling, and he has essentially said that the executive order by the president that you could not, basically directing all the people that are coming through in the caravan, warning them, look, if you want to seek asylum, you got to do it at a border crossing. You can't just rush across the border and then claim asylum. You've got to actually go to one of the stations there that is controlled by our Border Patrol, that is controlled by ICE, and have explained to them that you're trying to seek asylum, and then we'll hear your case and figure out exactly what it is that you need to do. Well, this judge has said that, I tell you what, before we even get to the actual ruling, there's something that I wanted to point out. This man is a district judge. And I'm not trying to belittle him. Being a district judge is a huge honor, but he is making a ruling for something pretty far out of his jurisdiction. The idea that any district judge anywhere in the country can make a ruling that will affect the entire country and tell the entire federal government you can't do this in any state is pretty far-reaching. I mean, if a judge here in Alabama started giving a ruling on what Texas had to do, I'd say it was an overreach too. Or Arizona or New York or whatever state you want to do. The idea that he, as a district judge that's supposed to be dealing with district matters, can say to the federal government, you're not allowed to do this, that is a pretty far overreach of the court. And it also defies about 180 years of court precedent, the ruling that he makes here. So let's actually get into the meat and potatoes of what we're talking about. He is saying now that based on overturning the Trump executive order, which honestly, I thought it was stupid for Trump to give that executive order, because what he was saying in his executive order is already the way that the law reads, so there was no point in making that executive order. And because he made that executive order, it kind of opened up the door for other people to go against it the way that they did in this court. So I think actually the president made a blunder, even though I agree with everything in the executive order. Putting an executive order forward kind of opened the door for legal challenges. And like I said, the law already said essentially what President Trump was saying in his executive order, so there was really no reason for him to direct ICE on this, or at least not in my opinion. Maybe there's a legal scholar that has a different take on that, but nonetheless, this ruling is completely off the wall because he's saying now that you can seek asylum. The federal government cannot deny a person seeking asylum regardless of how they entered the country. And this is one of the issues that I have with these liberal activist judges that will just rule based on their own feelings. They don't think about the consequences of their ruling, and they don't rule based on what the law actually says. And this is the problem that you're running into. Because if we are to follow this judge's opinion of how a person seeks asylum, then let's say you've been living in America for 30 years illegally. Been living here for 3 decades. And all of a sudden ICE shows up and they're about to deport you. Say, whoa, 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 I'm seeking political asylum from Honduras. Let's just say that's where he's from. Well, you can't seek asylum after you've already broken the law. That's the thing. You cannot. Asylum status does not undo crimes that you've committed. And crossing the border, whether you like it or not, crossing the border into the United States without proper documentation is illegal. This is the thing. We constantly talk about it as though it's not a crime. It is a crime. It is absolutely a crime. It is illegal to cross the border. That's why they are called illegal immigrants or illegal aliens, whichever phrase you want to use. And so this is the problem that you're running into. The judge is treating it as though saying, well, I'm seeking asylum status, undoes the fact that you already broke the law. And the penalty for that law needs to be enacted. And here's another issue that you're going to run in if we follow this to its logical conclusion, the ruling that this judge gives. What is to stop any immigrant at any time from claiming asylum status, regardless of how long he's been here, regardless of how he entered the country? What is to stop that from happening? Or what's to stop an immigrant that has already been here for a while and actually did migrate even legally, but has overstayed his visa and now that's expired and he stayed in the country anyway, which, by the way, accounts for about half of the illegal aliens in the country. Can he just say, oh, I'm seeking asylum from, whatever country I flew in from? Let's say I'm seeking political asylum from Syria. Well, you've been here 25 years. You've got kids. It's a little late to start seeking asylum or notifying us that that's the reason you're coming here. And so this is the problem with this ruling. It basically throws out the idea that we even have a border. Because if anybody can come in any time and just throw their hands up and say asylum when they get caught by the authorities, regardless of how long it's been, regardless of how they got in, regardless of their motivation, if that is the case, then we might as well just not have a border. And I'm not trying to make a straw man argument out of this. I'm not trying to take it to a ridiculous extreme. But really, what's to stop any person from doing exactly that if we follow this ruling to its logical conclusion? And another thing, doesn't that kind of negate the idea that we should have legal ports of entry in the first place? Because if it doesn't matter whether or not you came through an illegal point of entry or a legal point of entry or not, then why do we have stations down there in the first place? If you can just plow on through and be treated exactly the same as someone who actually did the legal thing and tried to come through a point of entry, then what's the point of having them? This whole thing makes no sense. And I think the truth is that's the real goal. I think underlying all of this, and this is why I have such a problem with activist judges that judge based on how they think the law ought to read as opposed to how it actually does read, I think that's actually the eventual goal. What they're actually wanting to do is they're wanting it to get to the point to where there is no legal point of entry because anybody can cross the border at any time and it doesn't matter. That seems to be the direction that this is heading. Because otherwise, why would you want to reward those who crossed the border illegally and committed a crime exactly the same as those that actually did it the legal way? This is the issue that you're running into. And here's another issue that you're running into with this ruling. he stated in his opinion that the president cannot unilaterally undo a law passed by Congress. Yeah, neither can a judge. You can't unilaterally, especially as a lone district judge, overturn the federal law. And that's exactly what he's doing. And not just some random federal law, the Constitution. But let's read the Constitution, Article 4, Section 4. The United States shall guarantee to every state in the Union a republican form of government and shall protect each of them against invasion, and on application of the legislature or of the executive, when the legislature cannot be convened, against domestic violence. Okay, so there you have it, black and white, the Constitution. The federal government has a specifically stated duty to keep people that are not supposed to be here from getting into the states. It has that responsibility to the states. That was part of the design of the Constitution. They're saying, we're going to have authority over immigration and naturalization, and because we have that authority, we are by extension going to take on the responsibility to make sure that the states are not invaded by foreigners. They're not invaded by foreign forces. Well, what if anybody can just come through the border at any time that they want to, how is that not derelict in their duty, their constitutionally given duty to keep the states from being invaded? Explain that one to me. Because I don't see how you get there. I don't see how you can say that the federal government, let's just ignore Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution because I want these people to come in. And one of the things that he's saying is, well, the president can't unilaterally undo a law by Congress. What law passed by Congress says that asylum seekers are to be granted asylum regardless of where their point of entry was? Because I don't know about that law. Now, maybe it's out there. Maybe some legal scholar can point it out to me. But to my knowledge, Congress has never passed that law. And so the idea that he's citing an overreach of executive power is hilarious because he's engaging in an overreach of judicial power. And the basis of his case that President Trump overreached would necessitate that he'd have to provide a specific federal law that his executive order defies, and he can't do it. He doesn't cite it in his opinion because it does not exist. And this is the issue that you're running into. Because if you could provide the law, that would be one thing, but that's not happening. So the Southern Poverty Law Center and the ACLU, they're the ones that brought this case. But here's another issue that you have with the people that are bringing the case forward. How did you get standing? Because in law, to acquire standing, in other words, to be enabled to sue somebody, to bring a case against somebody, you have to prove damages. Well, how do you prove damages if you're the SPLC and the ACLU? They're not being kept out of the country. So how did they even get standing to get to the point to where their case could be heard? Here's how, because this is all a matter of public record. They claimed that they would have to expend resources to defend their position if this were taken. So in other words, because it would cost them money to represent either clients or to represent people on a legal level, they're saying that because it would cost them money, that was damages. First of all, nobody's holding a gun to their head and making them do that. And second of all, if that is the case, if that is enough to get standing, then I can sue every single liberal media outlet in the country because I have to do prep work and it costs me money and it costs me time to be able to put together my arguments and think about how I'm going to counter it. Seriously, that was their standing. They're saying that they're going to have to expend money and time putting together all this stuff, put together arguments against it. Well, if that's the case, then how is it that I can't sue Bill Maher and Chris Cuomo and Don Lemon and CNN and MSNBC and Think Progress and Huffington Post? Why can I not sue those guys? Because if that constitutes damages by me voluntarily going out and using my time and my resources to counter their arguments, then you would have people suing each other all the time. I am choosing to take that fight up. And the ACLU and the Southern Poverty Law Center are choosing to take up this fight. And so not only is the ruling itself bad, they should have never been granted standing in the first place to even see a day in court. This whole thing just reeks of hypocrisy and stupidity. And here's the thing. Americans aren't the only ones that are upset about this. And I want to give a hat tip to the Associated Press for putting this together. Because being a typically a very left-leaning news organization, not as bad as some, obviously, but being sort of a left-leaning news organization, the AP tends to not run stories that hurts their cause, but they kind of did in this one, and I appreciate the Associated Press doing some actual journalistic work. So apparently hundreds of protesters in Tijuana, Mexico came out the other day to protest the caravan stopping in their city. Not Americans. People living in Mexico, in Tijuana, came out and protested in droves, saying they did not want the people in the caravan in their city, and they were kind of bunking there. And you'll love this. The chants that they were issuing, the first one, this is according to the AP, remember, Donald Trump was right. This is an invasion. They were actually chanting this. Donald Trump was right. This is an invasion. And they're right. By any dictionary definition, and this is what I got onto a rant with Donald, not this morning, but about a week ago, about the president calling it an invasion. You can only come up with, and we looked at the dictionary definitions of them, 2 out of the 3 definitions, 2 out of the 3 fit the caravan. And so if you're looking at the dictionary, not 1 but 2 of the definitions they provided actually fit the description that was going on there. So by that standard, this is absolutely an invasion. It is invading somebody else's land or domain. And they're doing so without their consent. Ergo, it's an invasion. And so you look at that, the Tijuanans are exactly right. Donald Trump was right on this one. And they also chanted, "Get out, Hondurans, we don't want you here." Man, those evil, hateful, bigoted Mexicans that just hate brown people. Because isn't that what the media has been telling us this whole time? That if you are against the caravan, it's because you are a racist, you're a bigot, you hate brown people, and you don't want more brown people in America, and that's why you don't want the caravan coming through. No, I'm against illegal immigration. I'm against people breaking laws. I don't care whether you're brown or black or white or purple or green with blue polka dots, which that actually would be pretty interesting. If you are breaking the law, you need to be held accountable for that law. You don't get to just run into the country whenever you want to. And another thing, too, about the refugee status thing. I'm glad that I live in a country where we do take in refugees. We do care about people. We try to do the best that we can to those that are actually dealing with issues to provide asylum for them. I did the story just a couple of days ago with Asia Bibi, the Christian that's being persecuted in Pakistan and people are trying to kill her. It's people like that I absolutely understand why we are granting asylum and refugee status to people like that. But here's the thing that we have to keep in mind. We can't just have massive droves of people crossing our border and claiming refugee status because, first of all, we don't know if each one of them have a legitimate claim to refugee status. But second of all, the idea that America is somehow other countries' dumping ground, that when they have citizens that they can no longer take care of and that they are not providing for, then, we'll just send them to America. They'll take care of them. It'll be fine. No, that's not what America is. America's government has a responsibility to protect our citizens. They are not charged with taking care of the rest of the world. And so this idea that we're supposed to be providing for them and taking care of every single refugee that has some kind of political disagreement with people in their country and that are suffering for it, I'm sympathetic to those people, and I want to help as many of those people as possible. But the idea that we have some kind of obligation to do so, that we're bad people if we don't take in every single person that claims refugee status in the world. No, America is not the dumping ground for every other country. It's just not who we are. We don't have that responsibility. It's a nice thing that we do it, but there's a difference in being charitable and being obligated to. It is a charitable thing that Americans want to help people that are suffering political or religious persecution, but we are not obligated to do so. It's a fine but important distinction that I want to make. And more from the AP. Quote, they also complained about how the caravan forced its way into Mexico, which is true. You can actually see the video of it. They were tearing down the walls on the southern border of Mexico. And then they continue on, calling it an invasion, and they voiced worries that their taxes might be spent to care for the group. Gosh, if only we had thought of that. That's exactly the complaint that conservatives have been issuing about the border for decades, literal decades. That when somebody comes into the community, if they are living there illegally, they don't pay taxes, yet they are getting benefits not only from welfare programs, which usually happens, or from the school system that usually happens, but also from protection for things like police. It costs more to police more people. It costs more to have a fire department for a larger city. And so when you're growing your population and a large portion of that population is not paying into the system, then they are getting things for free that the citizens are providing for, that they are giving their taxpayer money to provide services for people that are not paying into the system. And I think it's hilarious. The Democrats often talk about how rich people don't pay their fair share. You know who's really not paying their fair share? The people that are coming across the border, coming in here illegally, partaking in the services that are offered, and usually having their kids educated and fed and provided for, and not paying into the system. That's the people not paying their fair share. And there's all these programs with the SNAP program, food stamps. SNAP is the new food stamps. You've got all kinds of programs where it comes to employment, and yet they're still not paying into the system. And if the citizen is having to pay for services that are being provided to the non-citizen, then the non-citizen is getting a better deal than the citizen is. It's ridiculous. And the Tijuanans are well within their right to say, we don't like the fact that the government is taking our taxes and then using taxpayer money to provide for people that are not Tijuanans, that are not citizens, that are not supposed to be here in the first place. That is perfectly reasonable for them to take that stance. And Mexico actually paid for, in other words, Mexican dollars went to paying for police escorts for this caravan, escorting them right up to the U.S. border. Why? Why would they do that? Why would they expend their resources doing so? Because they didn't want to have to take care of them. They didn't want the caravan to break up, and now they've got to take care of these Hondurans. So what did they do? They just passed them on along up to Big Brother United States so that they could take care of it, so that then they'll be their problem. Mexico is a really crappy neighbor, and they have been for a long time. They are a really terrible ally, because when they have a problem with their own citizens or with citizens that came into their country from somewhere else, when they have an issue that they can't take care of, that they don't want to provide for, they just send them right on up into America. Basically trusting that we're just going to take care of it. They're the Americans. They'll be fine. They're a rich country. They can do it. That'd be like if your next door neighbor saw somebody running into his house and instead of shooting the guy was like, hey, you know what? My neighbor's got a lot nicer stuff than this. And you know what? In fact, I have a spare key to his house. So I tell you what, if you just won't rob me, I'll let you into his house. It'll be fine. That's basically what what the United States is doing to America. They escorted these people intending for them to go across the border and enter into the United States. And maybe what's going to happen now, and I hope that this would be the best case scenario, if Mexico gets stuck with most of these people and has to take care of them and get some political backlash from doing this, that would be the best case scenario, because maybe then they would see how it feels. And maybe then they would say, you know what, maybe we shouldn't be sending all of our citizens up to America that we can't provide for, we can't take care of. Because then maybe there would be a little bit of self-reflection from the Mexican government on that. And by the way, just a brief note on this, the Department of Homeland Security has reported and released a report today that they found over 270 caravan goers with criminal records. So these are just the ones that we know about. We don't know about the others, but at least 270 out of the 10,000 strong caravan have some kind of criminal record. And so the idea that these are just poor refugees, mostly women and children. Look, if you're looking at the video, that's not what it looks like. It looks like a bunch of young guys. And so 270 of them with criminal records, that's not really surprising. There is a legitimate concern that is going on here. So we're going to go ahead and wrap this up really quickly. I think we will. Yeah, we'll just go straight to the daily dose of stupid. If I can pull it up here.
That was stupid.
I know it was stupid.
Really stupid.
Hey, I just said it was stupid.
All right, our daily dose of stupid for today comes from Chipotle. And I think it's hilarious that on this day of Thanksgiving, we're going to do a food-related daily dose of stupid. So, full disclosure before I start this story, I hate Chipotle with a fiery, burning passion for a lot of reasons. Their food is way too expensive, their portion sizes are far too small, it's pretentious, and they're a Mexican restaurant that doesn't even have queso. What is wrong with you people? And I don't understand how they've stayed in business, period, much less had several branches and several new locations. So I've eaten at Chipotle a couple of times. I hated it both times. It wasn't that the food was horrible, but it was ridiculously overpriced and there wasn't nearly enough of it. And I didn't think it was all that good. You want a good Mexican place? Go to Moe's. Moe's is phenomenal. I used to work at Moe's. It's clean. I mean, just a great group. And they're based right here in the South. They're based out of Atlanta. So if, for my money, Moe's gives you much better quality food, much better food, and they're going to give it to you at a lower price, and they've got queso. I mean, I don't see any reason why anybody would ever pick Chipotle when there's a Moe's. But anyway, so I just wanted to let you know, I do have a little bit of bias here. I really hate Chipotle. And I also really detest the fact that they speak ill of farmers. I mean, they will just degrade farmers. And you talk to just about anybody that's in the agricultural field, they talk about how evil they are and how they abuse their animals and they're destroying the earth. And that's why they make their food with organic, or I'm actually a fan of the organic movement and I support organic farming and organic agriculture. But I don't like it when people like Chipotle in their high, mighty white ivory towers come down from on high and say, this food isn't fit to eat. These people are destroying people for profits and they're poisoning people because it lines their pockets. No, that's not who farmers are. I've worked with agriculturalists my entire life. And they really are doing the best that they can to put food on America's table and feed this country. And they're really, really good at it. Better than any other agricultural system in the world. And so, full disclosure, I really hate Chipotle as a company already, so just be aware of that. So here's the backstory. Chipotle started freaking out when a guy named Masood Ali tweeted a video of him being denied service, him and his friends, unless they showed her money up front. So the manager's there, they're coming in, they're trying to order food. She says, we're not making you any food. You have to show us that you can pay before we start making your food. And they start laughing and saying, well, you know, sorry. They started laughing and saying, well, we don't have to do that. You're not making other people do that. She's like, I'm sorry. You got to show me that you can pay before you pay. And she says in that video, she basically alludes to the fact that they have been in there before and not paid. In that video, the manager says, and I quote, you never have any money when you come here. So she gave a justification in the video that you never have money when you come here. I would think the assumption would be anybody watching that video would say, maybe she has a history with these people. She seems to talk like she knows them. She seems to talk like she's had problems with these customers before. But of course, this idiot tweets out that video and suggests that the reason that she's not serving him is because she's a racist. And Chipotle, because we live in this knee-jerk society now, they immediately go, well, that's not our mission. We don't treat people like that. We're so sorry that this happened to you. And they fire the manager without doing any investigation, without checking up. Anytime you see something like that, this is why I say it's a bad idea to make decisions in haste. It's a bad idea to make decisions when there's some kind of emotional appeal there, because that means it's probably concealing the facts. Not always, but it can. And so in this particular instance, they're looking at this and they say, oh, it's horrible that she was requiring them to show money first and refused to serve them until they did so. But they didn't ask, well, she's kind of talking like she knows them. That never dawned on them to ask the question, hey, why did you deny them service until they showed you money? They didn't even ask the manager to explain herself, to give her a chance to defend herself. This is the problem that I have with the social justice warrior mentality. It's completely reactionary. It's whatever I see on the surface, however that makes me feel, right then and there, that's what I'm going to make my decision based on. Stop and actually think before you do something stupid. And that's exactly what Chipotle did. They reacted, they did something stupid, and now they're getting called out for it. So let's go ahead and look at why that took place. If you look into this guy's history, and thanks to the Daily Caller for assembling some of these resources, let's look at some of his tweets, specifically on restaurants. So here he goes. Again, this is the same guy, Masa Assad, and he says, and I'm going to try to read this the way that you wrote it. I think Chipotle catching up to us fam. Should we change locations and what should we do about the other thing? So obviously an English major this guy is not, but nonetheless, he has basically been very public about the fact that he does a dine and dash pretty often, specifically with this Chipotle. That's on his Twitter. That's a post he wrote. And Chipotle doesn't do any investigation to even look at the guy's Twitter feed. There's just no curiosity. They immediately went straight to the worst case scenario, assuming that one of their own employees was a racist, which is just beyond stupid. And by the way, the security footage backs this up. They found security footage of this same group of guys, plus or minus maybe a couple of the people that were there, doing a dine and dash. And so this guy has had issues with this Chipotle before. And they act as though the woman is somehow wrong, the manager somehow is wrong for doing this. So let's look at another tweet that this guy, who's obviously a rocket scientist, tweeting this stuff out. Guys, we're borrowing food. That's it. And if the lady tries to stop you at the door, don't hesitate to truck there's some explicitives here, out of that. And he uses a very derogatory word for women. So here's another thing. The left, in the form of Chipotle, actually took the side of and defended this guy who's using derogatory slurs against women, because I thought we were supposed to be pro-woman. Apparently not when it conflicts with there's an intersectionality hierarchy there, that if you're a woman and you come up against a black guy, well, black is higher on the intersectionality hierarchy, and so you believe the black guy over the woman. Because again, rather than using facts and reason and logic and judging things on a case-by-case basis, it's far easier to just go, okay, let's see, he's a gay black Muslim, she's a Asian female. Well, Asians and females are lower on the hierarchy, so we're just going to believe this guy. Well, that doesn't take a whole lot of thought, and that's part of the reason that the SJWs do it. Basically, the more labels that you can rack up, the more valuable your opinion is, the more likely they are to believe you. So it's part of the reason that there's really no thought going into that. But this is a guy actually threatening violence against a woman to allow him to commit a crime, and this is the person that they sided with. All right, let's look at another one. This is another tweet by him. If you a real, again, expletives, we fina go, I think it's supposed to be go to, Applebee's and eat as much as we can and tip the nice lady 20 cents and walk out. So, again, this guy is on his own Twitter feed, on his own social media, admitting to crimes, which is a really stupid thing to do. Like, if you're going to go out and rob a convenience store, you probably shouldn't be posting on Facebook or Twitter about it. Just FYI for the future, in case anybody has any inclinations about committing any crimes out there, I would advise you just not to do that. But if you're going to commit a crime, why would you be dumb enough to actually post about that on social media? He probably, I'm glad that he did, because he probably would have gotten away with this had he not been tweeting about that, because the security footage was pretty strong, but they still couldn't 100% identify him from that. So nonetheless, this whole thing is just it's really blown up in Chipotle's face, and now they are the ones looking stupid for doing this, for reacting the way that they did. I love this. He also came out and claimed that she said what she did about him having to show her the money in a racist way, and he didn't like being called the thief. Well, there's only one problem with that. Turns out back in 2015, he actually pled guilty to stealing a value in excess of $1,000. So he is literally a thief. I mean, he would have been a thief if he had just done a dine and dash. He would have been a thief then anyway, because stealing food is, still illegal. But the point is, the point in all of this is, this guy is actually somebody that has been penalized and convicted in court of theft. So he may not have liked being called a thief, but he was still a thief. And it turns out Chipotle has offered to hire this woman back and apologized. I got to tell you, if I were this woman, I wouldn't go. There is no way I would go back and work for this company after being treated that way. I'd find something else to do. And it's not like a manager job at Chipotle is exactly the most glamorous thing. And so them acting like they're doing her this huge favor. Now, granted, I want to give them credit. I appreciate that they acknowledge that they were wrong and that they acknowledge that they made a mistake and they tried to correct it. I'm just saying from her perspective, if I were this woman, there's no way I would go back. If they're just going to assume that I'm screwing up without even giving me a chance to defend myself, I'm not going back to that company. I wouldn't do it. But I do hope that she lands on her feet, and I hope that everything works out for her. But when you're talking about the daily dose of stupid, we've seen a lot of stupid things in this segment, but this knee-jerk reaction to everything, this assumption of guilt, that is really stupid. And you wind up looking stupid in the aftermath of that. So just as a business person or as just somebody that goes through their daily life, talking about issues, talking with other people, please just don't react based on the first feeling that you have about something or at first glance. Think about things before you actually react to them. In fact, I think a better word to use here would be respond. We don't want to be reactionary. We want to actually think and reason through a situation and respond to it. Because if you don't, you might wind up on the daily dose of stupid one day. Chaplin's report is next.
In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplain Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on tactics.
Chaplin's report this morning comes from, since it is Thanksgiving and we're going to be off for Thanksgiving tomorrow, this will be our last show of the week. But since Thanksgiving is tomorrow, I wanted to go to the Psalms, and we were actually looking at a Psalm the other day. You may remember when we started out the show, we were talking about Ronald Reagan and talking about his Thanksgiving Day message. Well, there's a verse that he cited in the very first part of his proclamation, and it actually came from Psalm 75:1, and we're going to read the first 5 verses there. We give thanks to you, O God. We give thanks, for your name is near. Men declare your wondrous works. When I select an appointed time, it is I who judge with equity. The earth and all who dwell in melt. It is I who have firmly set its pillars, Selah. I said to the boastful, do not boast, and to the wicked, do not lift up the horn. Do not lift up your horn on high. Do not speak with insolent pride. There's a couple of really important lessons that I think come out of this verse. First of all, David starts his psalm with an admiration of God. We give thanks to you, God. We give thanks to you for your wondrous works. But what's really interesting here, and I think that there's a profound truth that goes along with this, is let's look at what wondrous works he's actually talking about. Let's look at the wondrous works that he's describing. And he speaks as God. He kind of enters into not necessarily speaking for God directly, but sort of saying this is how God would have responded to this. And speaking as God, he says, when I select an appointed time, it is I who judge with equity. The earth and all who dwell in shall melt, and it is I who have firmly set it on its pillars. So what does that mean? God's talking about judgment here. So what David is thanking God for, he's thanking him for the blessings that he gets, sure, and he's thanking him for his country and all these other things, all the things that God has provided him, which in David's case was a lot. But specifically in this psalm, What David is being thankful for is God's judgment. He's being thankful for God's wrath. And to us, that may seem a little bit weird, that you would be thankful for God's judgment. You would be thankful for him punishing the deeds of the evil. And he's saying, yes, God's justice is something to be grateful for. The fact that he goes after those who are wicked, he goes after those who defy his law, that he punishes them and makes them see the right way to do things. And whether they comply with it or not is up to them. But the point is, he does go after them, he does punish them, and he brings down the enemies of his people. And David is very grateful for that. And it's something that we should be grateful for too. You know, when you're a kid and you get a whooping, it's really hard for you to be appreciative of that whooping in the moment. You don't like it. It's obviously something that you don't care for. And so it would be easy for us to become resentful for our parents in that moment. But the truth is, I think most of us looking back at the way that we were raised, a lot of us would be grateful for a lot of the things that in the moment we didn't like, but really it was the best thing for us. And that's one thing that David is bringing up too. For those who are evil and that defy God, they are punished because God loves them, because he cares about people, because he cares about the other people that they might hurt by their bad actions. I mean, just like using the child analogy, one thing that will set a parent off, or at least should set a parent off, is when you have one of their kids attacking or harming their brother or sister. That will really get under a parent's skin. And it should. And that's exactly why God was worried about that, because from God's perspective, we're all brothers and sisters. We're all supposed to be looking out for one another, taking care of one another, and doing the best that we can to behave in such a way that brings about a godly, just society. And when people don't do that, when they take advantage of people, when they steal from others, when they do things out of envy and spite and maliciousness, that hurts God. And he punishes it because he doesn't want it to happen anymore. So it's as much as for the protection of victims as it is for his desire for them to be a better person as well. And so there's many ways, which David is pointing out, that we should be grateful for God's judgment. We should be grateful even for his wrath. And then he sort of ends this here. I say to the boastful, do not boast, and the wicked, do not lift up the horn. Do not lift up the horn on high or speak with insolent pride. What does that say there? God is saying, yes, I do these things and I punish people, but I do so because I want them to be better. I want you to take your pride away and humble yourself. I don't want you to boast. I want you to be dependent on me. And what's another message in that? That if we are humble, if we put ourselves aside and look at our blessings, we will be more grateful people. Because I'm convinced that one of the things that keeps people from bragging is humility. One of the things that keeps people from believing and thinking themselves more highly than they ought, to use the Bible's language, is because they're grateful for the things around them. They understand that the things around them were not necessarily things that they have because they're so great and because they're awesome and they acquired them. No, they got it because God allows them to have it. And they're grateful for it because of that. Because when you start looking at things around you as though they're gifts, you start becoming far more appreciative of them. When you understand that the things around you are not necessarily guaranteed and you're not going to have them just by virtue of being you, then you become more grateful for what you've been given. And that's the kind of idea that David is pushing, the kind of idea that I think Ronald Reagan saw in that psalm. And it's the same kind of idea that we should have this Thanksgiving season. That if we don't want to be arrogant people, we don't want to be wicked, we don't want to harm others, then one of the first things that we can do to help stave that off is to be grateful for what we've been given. And that will keep our pride at bay. Because if we understand that the things that we have, we're just stewards, we're just caretakers, and they're not something that have been given to us because of who we are, but because we're supposed to use them to help others, that is going to instill in us a sense of humility that will help us make better decisions in life. Stay the course, friends.